All right, let's jump into it. Today's deep dive takes us into Marine Corps doctrine, publication 1-2 campaigning. We're looking at the April 2018 version, the one straight from HQ. And, I've got to say, these excerpts you shared, this isn't just your typical, dry doctrine.
Wow.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
This is about how the Marine Corps thinks about the operational level of war.
Yeah.
That critical space where, tactical victories connect to the bigger picture, the strategy.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to pull out, I think, the gold from these excerpts, the core concepts that really matter for anyone in the military who wants to understand how what they do contributes to achieving those national interests.
And what's so interesting about this document is how it stresses that just winning battles, while important, it's not the end goal.
Okay, so it's not enough to just be good tactically?
Exactly. It's about connecting those tactical wins with the political objectives that are set at the strategic level. The foreword really hammers this home: tactical success must serve the demands of policy. You can win every single battle. But if those battles don't actually achieve the political outcome you're looking for, have you really succeeded?
That's a powerful point.
Mm.
So how does MCDP 1-2 help bridge that gap between what's happening, on the ground
Yeah.
and those high-level political goals?
Well, right off the bat, the document lays out those three levels of war, strategic, operational, and tactical. And it really emphasizes how they're all connected with that operational level serving as the critical link. It's where commanders have to think beyond just individual engagements and consider the broader context.
Well, I'm sure I'm picturing this right. The strategic level is where, national policy gets decided. And the tactical level is where you have, boots on the ground.
Yeah.
So is this a document saying that the operational level is where those two worlds meet?
You got it. It's like building a house. The strategic level is like the architect's blueprint. You've got the tactical level where you've got individual construction workers, laying bricks and hammering nails. And that operational level is like the foreman, making sure all of those individual efforts are actually aligned with the architect's vision. And you end up with a structurally sound house.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
I think it really highlights just how important that operational level is. But how does MCDP 1-2 actually guide commanders in navigating that space? It's got to be complex.
Well, one way is by emphasizing the dynamic relationship between strategy and operations. So strategy guides operations by shaping the aims, allocating the resources, setting constraints. But it's not a one-way street. Operational commanders also have a responsibility to communicate risks, back up the chain, seek clarification if those strategic aims aren't clear, and even recommend changes to the overall strategy based on what they're seeing, on the ground.
So it's more like a conversation then, a back and forth between the strategic and operational levels?
Absolutely. The document even points out that strategy has to adapt to operational circumstances. It's like a football game. The coach sets the game plan, that's the strategy. But the quarterback on the field, that's your operational commander, has to adjust based on the opponent's defense, the weather, the flow of the game.
Makes perfect sense. It highlights the need for adaptability and flexibility at that operational level.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the document also talks about the campaign as a key tool for operational commanders. What exactly does that mean?
The campaign is presented as the primary tool for achieving those strategic objectives. It's a framework for organizing and sequencing all of those different tactical actions. The battles, the engagements, the maneuvers, over time and space. In fact, MCDP 1-2 actually defines a campaign as a series of related military operations aimed at accomplishing a strategic or operational objective within a given time and space.
So the campaign is what gives those tactical actions meaning and purpose, right? It ensures they're not just isolated events, but part of a larger cohesive plan.
You got it. It's that bridge that connects those individual actions to the strategic outcome you want. And the document also highlights two key military strategies that campaign planners really need to understand: annihilation and erosion.
I'm familiar with those terms just generally.
Oh.
But can you break them down in the context of MCDP 1-2?
Sure. Annihilation, as the name implies, aims to completely destroy the enemy's ability to fight. It's about achieving decisive victory through overwhelming force.
So annihilation is the go-to strategy when the goal is unconditional surrender, or when the enemy just won't negotiate unless they're completely defeated.
You're exactly right. And historically, the Allied campaign against Nazi Germany in World War II is a classic example of an annihilation strategy.
That's a powerful example. What about erosion, though? How does that strategy differ?
Erosion is a bit more indirect. It aims to gradually wear down the enemy's will to fight by inflicting unacceptable costs and showing them that continued resistance is pointless. It's about convincing their leadership that peace, even if it's on unfavorable terms, is a better option than continuing to fight.
So it's more about breaking their spirit than completely crushing their military.
Exactly. Like in the American Revolution, the colonists didn't have the resources for a head-on fight with the British, so they adopted an erosion strategy, trying to make the war just too costly for Great Britain to keep going.
That's fascinating. It shows that, choosing the right strategy,
Right.
annihilation or erosion, depends heavily on the specific circumstances of the conflict and what you're trying to achieve politically.
Absolutely. And MCDP 1 to 2 emphasizes that campaign planners need to think very carefully about which strategy is the right fit for those strategic objectives that are set by the national leadership.
Now, the document also brings up these concepts of centers of gravity and critical vulnerabilities. Could you explain those a bit further?
Of course, centers of gravity are those things that an adversary absolutely needs to be able to function.
Hmm.
They're like the pillars that support an entire war effort. It could be key military forces, critical infrastructure, even things like public opinion or political alliances.
So if you can identify and target those centers of gravity, you can basically cripple your enemy's ability to fight.
Exactly. And that's where critical vulnerabilities come in. These are weaknesses that you can exploit to undermine those centers of gravity. It's about finding the chinks in their armor, the spots where they're most vulnerable to attack.
Almost like a game of chess. You're not just trying to capture pieces, you're trying to expose the enemy's king and deliver checkmate.
Exactly. And MCDP 1 to 2 actually references Clausewitz on this. He talks about how Alexander the Great's army was his center of gravity. Losing it would have meant his downfall.
Clausewitz also pointed to things like capitals alliances, even public opinion as potential centers of gravity.
So understanding the enemy's centers of gravity and their critical vulnerabilities is essential for effective campaign planning.
You got it. It's about knowing where to hit to get the maximum effect. And speaking of planning, MCDP 1-2 also talks about this idea of a campaign concept.
I'm intrigued. What is a campaign concept and what makes a good one? The campaign concept is basically the big idea that guides the whole campaign. It should be bold, creative, and adaptable. It outlines the general approach and gives you options to adjust to changing conditions.
So it's like the blueprint for the entire campaign. Sets the direction and provides a framework for decisions.
Exactly. A good campaign concept should be clear and concise, but it should also allow for flexibility because, things rarely go perfectly according to plan in war.
That makes sense. MCDP 1-2 also talks about breaking the campaign into phases. What's the point of doing that?
Phasing is about managing that complexity of a campaign by dividing it into these more manageable stages. Each phase should have a specific objective that contributes to the overall campaign goal. It helps commanders anticipate how the enemy might react and plan for contingencies.
So it's not just about setting arbitrary deadlines.
No, the document stresses that those phases should be event-driven. It's about achieving specific objectives and then transitioning to the next phase based on how the situation is developing. It's about being adaptable and responsive to the fluid nature of war.
It sounds like phasing is crucial for keeping the momentum going and making sure that the campaign stays on track to reach those strategic objectives.
You got it. It provides structure and helps commanders use their resources effectively, while still having the flexibility to adapt to those unexpected challenges.
Now, while we're on the topic of planning for the unexpected, MCDP 1-2 also addresses something that often gets overlooked: conflict termination.
You're right. The document emphasizes the importance of defining the desired end state right from the beginning. What does victory actually look like? And planning for the transition to those post-conflict operations.
So it's not just about winning the war. It's about securing the peace and making sure there's a smooth handover to whatever comes next.
Precisely. And that takes careful planning and coordination at the operational level. It involves things like disengagement, force protection, reconstitution, and redeployment.
It sounds complex.
It is, and it really highlights how important foresight and anticipation are at that operational level. You have to start planning for the end of the conflict even while you're still fighting it.
Makes sense. Now, throughout all of this, from the campaign planning to the execution and even the conflict termination, there's one recurring theme that we haven't explicitly talked about: leadership.
That's true. And NCDP 1 to 2 devotes a significant amount of attention to how important leadership is at that operational level.
What are some of the unique challenges that operational commanders face when it comes to leadership?
Well, for one, they often have to lead these large, diverse forces that are spread out over huge distances. They have to inspire and motivate those forces, build cohesion, and make sure their intent is understood and carried out at every level.
So it's not just a matter of giving orders.
Not at all. It's about building trust, building relationships, creating a sense of shared purpose. The document even brings up Field Marshal Slim's experience in Burma during World War II. He emphasized that operational commanders have to make their intentions clear right through the force.
Powerful insight. It really highlights how important clear communication is and making sure everyone understands the mission.
Exactly. And MCDP 102 really underscores that effective leadership is absolutely essential for success at that operational level of war.
Okay, I think we've covered a ton here.
Yeah.
We've talked about the levels of war, that dynamic relationship between strategy and operations, the importance of campaigns, the different strategies of annihilation and erosion, those concepts of centers of gravity and critical vulnerabilities, the need for a strong campaign concept and effective phasing, and the crucial role of leadership.
Yeah, and I think it's clear that MCDP 102 provides a really valuable framework for understanding how the Marine Corps approaches the operational level of war.
Absolutely. But it's also clear that MCDP 1-2 is more than just the theoretical document.
You're right. It gives you practical guidance that can be used in real-world situations. And that's what we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Great point. We've laid the foundation, and now it's time to look at how to apply these concepts in practice.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, so building on that foundation, let's dive a little deeper into actually designing and executing a campaign. MCDP 1-2 has some really interesting guidance here.
Okay, so we talked about the big picture, the overall strategies. What are some of the key things that commanders need to consider when they're putting together a campaign plan?
One of the most crucial things the document highlights is really understanding that military strategic aim that the campaign is supposed to achieve. This comes directly from those national policy objectives we were talking about. It's like the specific political effects that you want military action to produce.
So it's about making that connection between what you're trying to achieve politically and how military force can get you there.
Exactly. And once that strategic aim is crystal clear, the document stresses the importance of thoroughly analyzing the enemy, figuring out their centers of gravity, their critical vulnerabilities, and how they might react to what you do.
It's that classic know your enemy principle.
Right.
Right. But it sounds like MCDP 1-2 is pushing for an even deeper level of understanding.
Absolutely. It's not just knowing their military strength. It's about grasping their whole operational system, their motivations, how they make decisions, their cultural nuances, the whole picture.
So once you have that deep understanding of the enemy, that's when you can start developing your campaign concept. We touched on this earlier, but what does MCDP 1-2 say makes a really effective concept?
It really emphasizes boldness, creativity, and flexibility. A good campaign concept. It should be innovative. You don't want to fall into predictable patterns that the enemy can anticipate, and it should offer multiple options so commanders can adjust as things change.
I guess having that clear vision is vital, but so is being able to adapt and react to the unexpected. Because we all know things rarely go exactly to plan in the real world.
You're right. And that's why the document emphasizes the importance of phasing the campaign, breaking it down into those manageable event-driven stages we discussed. It helps commanders think ahead about potential branches and sequels as the campaign develops.
So you're not just planning for success, you're also planning for the inevitable hiccups and setbacks that are going to happen.
Right. Now, another important aspect of campaign planning that MCDP 1-2 highlights is how you integrate all those different warfighting functions. It identifies 6 key functions. Command and control maneuver fires intelligence, logistics, and force protection. And it emphasizes that these have to work together seamlessly.
So it's not enough to have a brilliant maneuver plan or just tons of firepower. It's about making sure everything works together.
That's the key takeaway. And each of these functions has its own challenges at the operational level. Take command and control, for example. At this level, it's about managing a massive amount of information, coordinating with all these different military and civilian organizations, and ensuring that the commander's intent is crystal clear and gets executed across this widely dispersed force.
Sounds incredibly complex. And I bet logistics is a whole other ballgame at the operational level.
You bet. Operational logistics is all about connecting those strategic resources to the tactical needs on the ground. It's making sure that the right supplies, equipment, and personnel are where they need to be when they need to be throughout the entire campaign.
So it's anticipating needs, managing limited resources, and staying flexible enough to adapt to all those inevitable changes that are going to happen on the ground.
Exactly. And of course, force protection remains critical throughout the whole campaign.
I imagine force protection looks different at the operational level. What are some of the big things to consider there?
It's about anticipating and mitigating threats to your forces, your facilities, your critical lines of communication. It's about protecting your own centers of gravity and minimizing those critical vulnerabilities we talked about earlier.
It's like this constant balancing act, trying to accomplish your goals while simultaneously keeping your forces and resources safe.
You got it. And speaking of balance, MCDP 1-2 repeatedly stresses the importance of maintaining that strategic orientation throughout the entire campaign.
That sounds familiar. Could you remind me what that means in this context?
It means you never lose sight of those political goals that are driving the whole campaign. Operational commanders have to constantly be looking at their actions and decisions through the lens of those goals, making sure that those hard-won tactical victories are actually contributing to strategic success.
It's like keeping the big picture in mind, understanding how what's happening on the ground impacts the political landscape. Almost like a chess player who's also got one eye on the geopolitical board at the same time.
That's a great way to put it. And it really highlights how crucial communication with higher headquarters is. Operational commanders have to provide clear and timely assessments of the situation, outline what the implications of different courses of action might be, so that those strategic goals can be adjusted if necessary.
Sounds like clear and constant communication is key. Speaking of communication, we've talked about leadership a lot throughout this deep dive, but MCDP 1-2 really seems to put a special emphasis on it at the operational level.
You're right. The document points out the unique demands that are placed on operational commanders. They've got to inspire, motivate, and unify these large, diverse forces that are often spread out over huge distances. Building trust cohesion and a shared sense of purpose, that's what truly defines operational leadership.
So it's not just about giving orders. It's about creating that shared understanding, that common purpose that ties the whole force together.
Yeah.
It's almost like a conductor leading an orchestra, bringing all those different instruments together to create a harmonious and really powerful symphony.
That's a great analogy. And along with that shared understanding, MCDP 1-2 also talks about the importance of surprise and tempo when you're executing a campaign.
Those definitely seem like critical elements in warfare. How does the document address them?
It stresses that achieving surprise, whether it's through deception, ambiguity, or stealth, can have a decisive impact on the campaign. And it emphasizes maintaining a faster operational tempo than the enemy, basically dictating the pace of events and seizing the initiative.
So it's about being unpredictable, keeping the enemy off balance, and always staying one step ahead.
Exactly, and that requires a really good grasp of the enemy's capabilities and how they make decisions, plus the ability to adjust to the constantly changing conditions on the battlefield.
Makes sense. And none of that's possible without good intelligence. MCDP 1-2 seems to put a lot of weight on that too.
Absolutely. The document highlights intelligence as crucial for both planning and executing the campaign. It's about making sure you have a clear picture of the enemy, the battle space, the potential opportunities and risks that come with different courses of action.
So it's not just about gathering information. It's about processing it, making sense of it, and turning it into those actionable insights that can inform decision-making at the operational level.
Exactly. MCDP 1-2 really drives home that intelligence is the fuel for successful campaigning.
Okay, I think we've explored a lot here. From the strategic aim and the campaign concept to the integration of those warfighting functions, the importance of leadership, and the role of surprise, tempo, and intelligence.
Yeah, we have. And I think it's pretty clear that MCDP 1-2 offers this incredibly comprehensive picture of how the Marine Corps approaches that operational level of war.
It definitely does. It really highlights just how complex and nuanced planning and conducting military operations is. It's not just about winning battles. It's about understanding the strategic context, making smart decisions, adapting to the unexpected, and ultimately achieving those overarching political goals that are set by the national leadership.
You're right. It requires a different way of thinking, a broader perspective that goes beyond just the immediate fight. It's about seeing the whole chessboard, not just your own pieces.
Love that analogy. MCDP 1-2 is like the manual for playing that strategic chess game. But it's not just a theoretical exercise, right?
Not at all. And that's what we'll be digging into as we wrap up this deep dive. We've laid the groundwork by exploring those key concepts and principles from MCDP 1-2, and now it's time to see how those translate into action, how they influence decision-making in the real world.
I'm excited to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've really, gone deep into this, from those high-level strategies to the nitty-gritty of campaign planning and execution.
Yeah.
But it feels like there's still more to uncover.
You're right. MCDP 1-2 lays out the framework for how we think about campaigning. But it also acknowledges that putting these concepts into action, that's the real challenge. It's when commanders are facing these incredibly complex situations with maybe limited information under a ton of pressure, that's when this doctrine truly comes alive.
So it sounds like you're saying MCDP 1.2 isn't just like a rigid set of rules. It's more like a set of principles that guide decision-making in this, dynamic and constantly changing environment.
Exactly. Think of it as a toolbox.
Yeah.
It gives commanders all these different tools and techniques, but it's up to them to choose the right ones for the job, adapt them to the specific situation, and then use them effectively.
I like that. It really highlights how important judgment and adaptability are. I mean, no two conflicts are the same.
No.
I mean, every campaign is going to have its unique challenges.
Absolutely. And that's why MCDP 1 to 2 puts so much emphasis on critical thinking and innovation. It encourages commanders to question their assumptions, challenge what everyone thinks they know, and look for creative solutions to those complex problems because they're going to face them.
So it's about being a student of war, always learning, adapting, evolving.
Exactly. And it's not just for senior commanders either. MCDP 1 to 2 makes it clear that every Marine, no matter what their rank or MOS is, they need to understand how what they do contributes to the overall campaign.
That takes us back to that idea of strategic orientation, right? Understanding that even those seemingly small tactical actions, they can have a ripple effect at the operational and strategic levels.
You got it.
Yeah.
Every Marine, from the rifleman on the front line to the logistician keeping those supply lines going, they all play a crucial role in achieving those strategic objectives.
It's about being a strategically minded Marine, no matter what your job is. And that requires a certain level of intellectual curiosity, a desire to understand not just what you're doing, but why.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what makes MCDP 1 to 2 such a valuable document. It challenges Marines to really think critically, to understand how complex war is, and to develop a deeper appreciation for that operational level.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into MCDP 1 to 2, I'm kind of left with this feeling that it's more than just a doctrine document. It's a call to action.
I like that. A call to action for Marines to think strategically, be adaptable, be innovative, and really embrace their role in achieving those bigger objectives.
And it's a call to action that I think goes beyond the battlefield, too. These principles, strategic thinking, adaptability, being able to connect individual actions to larger goals. These are valuable in any field where leadership planning and execution are critical.
Definitely. Whether you're leading a team, developing a business strategy, or even just working towards a personal goal, understanding these concepts from MCDP 1 to 2 can be incredibly helpful.
It's about understanding how everything is connected, seeing that big picture, and being able to adjust your approach as things change.
And maybe most importantly, recognizing that success takes more than just brute force or just sheer determination. It takes careful planning, effective execution, and a really deep understanding of the context you're operating in.
So as we leave our listeners to think about all of this, I have one final question I want to pose.
Go ahead.
Think about your own life or your professional goals. What are your centers of gravity? Those crucial elements that you need to be successful. And maybe even more importantly, what are your critical vulnerabilities? Those weaknesses that if you don't address them could really undermine your efforts.
That's a great question. It really gets to the heart of what MCDP 1 to 2 is all about. Understanding not just how to win, but how to achieve lasting success.
Exactly. It's a question that challenges us all to think strategically about our own lives and apply those principles of campaigning to our own personal and professional pursuits.
I think that's a great place to end. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
Thanks for joining me on this journey, and of course, thanks to you, the listener, for sharing those excerpts and inspiring this conversation. Keep those strategic minds engaged.